So welcome everyone to this meeting. I'm Vanessa Maydew, the Communications and Knowledge Exchange Specialist for SEBI-Livestock, which is the Center for Supporting Evidence-Based Interventions in Livestock. We facilitate the livestock data for decisions community of practice. Some quick tips before we get started. If you can please rename yourself with your full first and last name and organization so we know who you are. To do this, open the participants list in Zoom, hover over your name and click more. You should be able to rename. You're welcome to turn your video on. We'd love to see your faces. We'll keep you on mute until the discussions begin. You can use the chat anytime for questions and comments, and we'll do our best to address these throughout the meeting. So as you may know, today's session is part of our annual LD4D community meeting, which has been taking place all week. We have an exciting program of webinars, workshops, and discussions on livestock data topics, including environment, pastoralist systems, ontologies, economic analysis, gender, and much more. So we do encourage you to check out the other sessions if you're interested. Your registration gives you access to everything. You can also connect, share, and learn with your peers using the Braindate Learning platform, which we'll share a little bit more on later. Before we begin, if you want to take a moment to say hello in the chat with your name and organization and what brought you here today, that would be very interesting. And with that, I will hand over to Louise Donnison, SEBI Data Manager, who will introduce the session's objectives and agenda.
Thank you, Vanessa. So today, for our 1-hour session, we want to explore the Livestock Project Portal and its potential role in donor coordination. So this session is an opportunity for us to showcase the portal, to gather feedback on its utility for donor investment coordination, and also to explore a bit some potential future feature requests that the audience may have. So we're going to kick off. I'm going to give a brief introduction to the project portal. Then we're going to hand over to Shannon, who is our program officer at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, to give us sort of a donor perspective to donor coordination. And then Sarah from Yeti is going to give an introduction to data at Yeti, and it's the Yeti data that backs this dashboard, and we're using their data. We're going to do, we've got a 4-minute video showing some of the features of the dashboard. And then we're going to have a sort of a 20-25 minute discussion using Menti facilitated by Annie. Next slide, please. So really the portal's to answer the question, who's funding what, where, and when? This is really to support better investment decisions, better resource allocation through donor coordination. It's really so donors can actually understand who else is investing in countries that may be of interest to them, but also understand who's investing in similar areas that they're interested in other countries. As we've mentioned, we are using Yeti data, and one of the reasons why we're so excited to use that particular data source is it's trusted, but it's also comprehensive. As you'll find out later on in the session, donors submit their projects there, so we believe it's fairly complete. There are gaps which we would be keen to sort of explore in the discussion. There may be private sector projects that are missing, and also it does rely on the people publishing the data to tag it appropriately. Even though the data is available, it's also important to make it accessible to users. So we've created an interactive dashboard to really try to help answer that question of funding what, where, and when. And what we're trying to do is let users who haven't got much time at a glance see that landscape of investments. And you'll see how all those features come together in the demo. And finally, this is still very early days, but we have had 1 or 2 demo sessions with 2 donors and 1 or 2 implementers to get early feedback. And so far, the feedback's been positive. We haven't shown this to any governments yet, but we'd just love to hear your feedback later on in the session. So without any more of ado, I'll hand over to Shannon to see sort of that donor perspective.
Great. Thanks, Louise. So thanks for the chance to provide a couple of comments. As Louise mentioned, my name is Shannon Messenhowski, and I work for the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation and get to work with the SEBI-Livestock team on the multiple dimensions of their program, this livestock project portal being an important one. And I guess sort of coming from a funder perspective and having worked at a different funding organization before the foundation, it became quite clear that investment decisions are made for many reasons at different institutions. And I think everybody on the call probably has their own firsthand experience with that. And so the ability to map out sort of ongoing or historic investments in a given geography or by species or by subject matter really hasn't been possible. And sometimes that disorganization can even be at a single funder level. So for instance, from the foundation, sometimes it can be really difficult to, at a moment's notice, pull up a list of everything we're doing in small ruminants or everything we're doing in Ethiopia. And so I think a tool like this from a funder perspective, this creates sort of the lack of a tool like this has created the potential for overlapping investments across donors, redundancy. It misses an opportunity for us to connect on activities that may have similar objectives or goals. We're missing the chance to incorporate lessons learned by contacting others that are running programs. And essentially, we're missing the opportunity to avoid the sort of reinventing of wheels, which is what we're all trying to avoid. And ultimately, I think the lack of some sort of project portal or platform, it puts the burden of coordination on local organizations and local governments. And this is exactly what we don't want to see happening. It has them in the position of trying to reconcile the lack of coordination between funders rather than focusing on the collective impacts that we all agree they should be driving. And so I think we know that there's other tools such as investment plans or livestock master plans and prioritization models that are intended to help with this, but a tool like the Livestock Project Portal really could be a resource to consult when you're a funder or sort of an implementer thinking about timely engagements, opportunistic investments, or as you're developing your own sort of country or commodity-based strategy. So I think from a funder perspective, this tool fills a much needed gap in trying to help us at a very high level start to coordinate and facilitate early engagements in the livestock sector. So with that, thanks, Louise, and I will pass it on, I think, back to you or to Sarah.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. That was great, giving that sort of context as a user, how this tool can really help you use some of that evidence to inform the decisions. So I'm now going to hand over to Sarah, who's going to tell us a bit more about the Yeti and the data.
So thank you very much for the opportunity to present today. I will keep it quite short, but we'll share a bit of an introduction to Yeti and how data published to Yeti is being used and how you can contribute as a data user to improve the quality of Yeti data to help it better meet your needs for coordination in the livestock sector. So I'm Sarah McDuff. I work for UNDP as part of the Yeti Secretariat, and my role is to support data users to access, understand, and utilize Yeti data. And of course, our primary goal as Yeti is to make sure that we're making data available that can be used to improve development outcomes. So we're very happy to see the Yeti data in the Livestock Project Portal, and particularly interested in the intended use of this data to improve donor coordination, which is certainly one of the key ways in which Yeti data is intended to be used. So as I'm sure most of you are aware, but if you're not, Yeti is a global initiative working to improve the transparency of development and humanitarian resources. It was launched in 2008 at the Third High Level Forum on Aid Effectiveness. And it's run by a secretariat, which is coordinated by UNDP, and we work together with colleagues from UNOPS and also from Development Initiatives, which is a UK-based international development organization that manages Yeti's technical tools. Yeti is funded and governed by its members, which are made up of lots of different types of organizations. And the data that is made available in Yeti is published by more than 1,500 organizations. So what does Iott do, sort of in simple terms? So basically, we provide the technical infrastructure and the support to organizations to enable them to publish data to Iott. So these organizations range from multilateral and bilateral organizations to NGOs to foundations to the private sector, where there could be better coverage, as you mentioned, and to enable them to publish data, open data on the development and humanitarian activities. So these organizations publish their data according to the Iott standard, which of course Iott maintains, and this is a set of rules and guidance that enables the standardization of this information. And then once the information is published, it's available, it's free and open for anyone to access online. And then we work to make sure that the data is used and is able to meet the needs of data users. So just at a high level, how is Iott data published and accessed? So of course, organizations gather their data internally, they convert it to the Iott standard, and then they publish it to Iott using the Iott registry. After this data is published, we make it available for users to access. Of course, we make it available to access directly via an API, but also using different data access tools. And after my presentation, I'll put some links in the chat, but just a couple of the tools that you may or may not be familiar with. We have Datastore Search, which enables access to all of the raw data from Iott. It takes a bit to process the data using this tool, but it allows access to all of the data published. Our most known data access tool is called Portal, which enables you to quickly search and filter information available published to Iott. And we have finally an interim tool called the Country Development Finance Data Tool that provides access to spreadsheets with a processed subset of Iott data by country or region. So, and these spreadsheets can be used for easy analysis. And of course, there are many externally developed tools as well, and I'll share a link as well to a list of some of those. So who uses Iott data and how? So I'll just keep this at a bit of a high level, but users of Iott data are comprised of actors across the development and humanitarian space. And while Iott was originally launched to make data available to partner country governments, of course, data is used by a wide range of development actors. So I've just put a few examples here just to give you an idea. So of course, partner country governments use data from Iott to inform national budget planning, often as a complement to data available at the country level, to conduct analysis on the external development finance landscape, to monitor development spending and enable dialogue with DPs and development partners, and also to enable coordination, right? Like in particular sectors. Development partners, I've just put a few examples here, use the information for accountability, so for both of governments and partners in the delivery of resources, for advocacy, for targeted coordination in particular sectors, policy areas, or locations, which is kind of where I would see that this kind of portal fits, and research to inform policy and advocacy, of course, the external development finance landscape analysis, and the development of internal platforms to showcase the data that's been published by organizations. But of course, while Iott data is already useful to many data users, there is still room for improving Iott data quality to ensure that it meets the needs of Iott's data users. And so I just wanted to kind of highlight some ongoing efforts by the Iott Secretariat and its community to improve Iott data quality. So there's a tool called the Yeti Validator. This is a tool primarily used by publishing organizations to make sure the data conforms to the Iott standard. We're working on the development of a data quality index, which is comprised of measures which are designed to monitor and assess data quality issues that impact the usability of the data. So this is informed by use cases like yours to make sure that the data available is of good quality and meets the needs of data users. And of course, we do direct outreach to publishers, both, you know, to communicate issues we found, but also that are communicated by data users. Of course, key to informing these efforts is the needs of data users. So you can definitely contribute to these efforts. So, you know, as you're working with the portal, or, you know, exploring the portal, or, you know, see data quality issues, You can reach out to us, and you can also reach out to publishers directly if that's feasible. So let us know what particular issues are most impacting your ability to use the data. And we also encourage you as Yeti to get engaged if you're interested in this and exploring Yeti data more. We have a community platform called Yeti Connect. And so we would encourage you to get engaged on that platform, and we'll put a link in the chat. So thank you very much for allowing me to share a little bit about Yeti.
Thank you very much, Sarah. That was great. So like we said, we're very pleased to be using this data, which has had so much sort of resource put into it as a sort of a trusted data source. So yeah, I think now we're going to show sort of the demo of the dashboard. We have a video, and so you'll see some of that data actually in action, but in the context of livestock. So the project portal was actually produced by Alap, who's on the call. He developed it. And as you can see, this is the landing page. We'll provide a link afterwards so you can explore. And we've got 4 different views of the data. And on the landing page also, you can see some sort of summary statistics. Now, this is the publisher page. And so as you can see, we have, we'll scroll down in a minute, there's different publishers here and their number of activities. You can also toggle between organization name and organization type. So we can also group things like government departments, government fund publishers together. And here we're showing the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation activities. There's 88. And then we have a list of the activities, but we've got filters. And really the purpose of these filters is to help you answer those questions around the who, which is obviously the publisher, also the person on the ground implementing it, but also the where. In this case, you can filter the data by country. And we've also got sort of an activity status as well. So on the table at the bottom, it's color coded on activity. And here we've just filtered on data. So we've got a free text search as well. So you can sort of explore the activities. And this is us. And as you can see, we've got a title, a description, and then who we're funded by and an implementer. So when we have the Menti discussion at the end, if there are ideas of what else you'd like to see here, that would be great. One thing we're thinking of is we would like to have links out to different websites to provide a sort of a deeper view of the knowledge. Now we've moved to country view, and you can filter on the map. And so this is pre-filter for Ethiopia, and there's 83 activities. And then there's so we can do a free text search, find out in the description how many activities have vaccine. We can also explore different countries, statuses. So it's showing the sort of types of filters and searches you can do. One area that we are aware of is that a lot of activities don't actually have country tagged. We are looking at whether we can sort of group, sometimes there's regional data. So there's these sort of ideas that we're thinking of for future iterations. This is over time now, exploring activities over time. See a list of activities there. And you'll notice there, this was what we were talking with, we've talked with Sarah about earlier, is we have noticed 1 or 2 data quality issues. I think you'll notice in the start year there was 1900. And these are the type of things that we're really excited to be able to work with Yeti over if we spot 1 or 2 things like that to improve the data quality. this final page is actually the sector code. And as well as having livestock projects, livestock can also be tagged with another sector. And then finally, we've not only done a livestock portal, we've done a fisheries portal. And so there's also the way the code has been written to extract the data, we can actually switch sector codes and produce different views of the data. And this is on livestockdata.org as well, we have a fisheries portal. So hopefully that's given you a bit of an idea of some of the functionality of the portal. And the next session, we want to sort of make it very interactive, and we've actually got some questions that we'd love to explore with you as an audience to get your feedback. And we're going to use something called Menti. It's a sort of it's a tool for quick polling, and all you have to do is open up a browser, type in a URL and a code, and we'll put those details in the chat. So yes, so now you're seeing the Menti page, and so if you go to a browser, you can do it on your laptop or on your phone, type in menti.com and put in the code. And then what you should be able to see is a text box where you can answer the question. You can start answering the question, and please feel free to add your name as well if you for your responses. And we're going to have 4 guided questions. And I'd like to take this opportunity to hand over to Annie now, who's going to help us facilitate this part of the discussion.
Hi everybody. I don't have anything to do until we get some content, so I'm really looking forward to seeing if anyone would use this tool, and if so, how.
Annie, there's someone posted a question just to me in the chat, and I wonder if we can touch on it while everyone votes.
Yes, certainly.
Okay, it's a question from Mariela Varas, I think World Bank. So how do you feed the database? I'm assuming that each organization needs to provide this info to Yeti, or do you use what is publicly available? It would be interesting to have projects that are also in the pipeline and that may not always be available. Another question is, how is this platform different from the one being developed by FAO called LICS or LICS?
So I can sort of sounds, so the project being developed by FAO, I don't know the details. This particular project, I think we're taking data from Yeti. So if they were taking data from Yeti, it would be the same. It would just be sort of different views of it. I don't know if there's anyone on the call who knows more about perhaps that particular initiative, or
Louise, I can chime in. I'm not sure if there's anybody from FAO.
Mamadou Mane, I'm from FAO on the call, just working on that specific project for FAO.
Perfect.
The
So Mamadou,
project will.
go right ahead.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much. And then, the project we are working in is like a livestock information coordination system, which includes a database and which is implemented at a country level. And then actually we are not using yet this database, the Yeti database, but we are just implementing it at country level. The next phase of that database will be working to open that database with the partners. We see through this tool here, kind of a gold mine for us to use this database to get in touch with the partners to get them in that in our database. Let us just explain that the activity we're working in, the database we're working on is activity based. So we are working at activity level of livestock activity level.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think this Yeti is it is quite high level, and so it's sort of we're delighted to be working with Yeti because it's the publishers are sort of committed to uploading the data into their database. So it gives us sort of a very complete picture. It's not just livestock, they cover all aid. So when we've been looking at the data, it's been fascinating. You've got human health there, social projects, education, and we've just taken a small slice of it. So it's quite high level, yeah. And I think there was another question from, was it Mariella about one about Yeti, Vanessa, did you mention? Or have we answered, I was just wondering if we answered the questions that were asked.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon. This is Mariela. Sorry that I put the question on the chat. I did it right before Menti was mentioned, so apologies for that. My question is, how is Yeti fed? Where do they gather, or how do they gather all the data, the information that you I don't know how you do that. Being from the World Bank, you use publicly available data, and because I also put that it would be interesting to know products that are on the pipeline, so they are not yet public.
Thank you, Mariella, because you've already anticipated something I was going to ask you. So, would anyone like to take that question on? How Yeti is fed, and are there pipeline projects in there as well as projects that are already approved and funded? Can anyone take that one on?
So Annie, I can try and answer that question. With the data being fed to IITI, let's say for World Bank, it's the publisher or the implementers that will actually report that data on IITI's repository. Also, you did mention about the activities that are ongoing. So there are a lot of activities that are listed even on Livestock Project Portal, which are ongoing. So there is an activity status bar on the Livestock Project Portal, so which lists if it's what status activity a particular activity at, if it's at completion stage, if it's active, or it's post completion. So there would be activities even from World Bank. It's not the data. Especially at activity level, it's not the publicly available data. It's actually been fed to the repository either by publishers or implementers.
Right, thank you. Mariella, does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you very much.
That's great. Okay, and I can see we already have some very interesting things in here to do with a sort of general landscape activities, a big picture mapping of geographies, right down to knowing exactly who's doing what and possibly connecting with them to discuss things. So there's a very wide range of things here. And I think one of the things that was in my mind was, how timely does this data need to be? And also, how complete does it need to be? And so before we move to the next question, could we get some kind of a sense of how complete is this data landscape in Yeti? What proportion of what's out there are you likely to be capturing? And I realize this may be an impossible question to answer, in which case just tell me to shut up and we'll move to the next question. Sarah or Alap, would anyone like to have a punt at that one?
Here, in terms of livestock activities, whatever it's listed as livestock on IITI's repository, it's been captured on Livestock Project Portal, but it's relying on the data participants who are listing or who are reporting the data on the repository. So there would be a lot of activities happening across the globe, but which are not reported. So that's not been included. So there would be microfinancing or micro aid happening. And that might not be here. So
okay, so that's perhaps something that will iteratively grow. I think there's always a tagging question, isn't there? When you're sticking something in a database, what do you tag it as? So perhaps more the data's pulled out and used, and there's an interest shown, the more incentive there will be for people to tag things as livestock when they're working on livestock.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's worth adding that Alap's been looking at, so livestock is a code, but above livestock, it's sort of categorized under agriculture. And we know that there are some livestock projects that are being put under agriculture that aren't tagged as livestock. So if there are gaps, major gaps, if people sort of contact us, we'd be happy to look at that and see if that's being categorized under the agricultural sector code.
Great. Okay, now we've got a not yet question, and I'm going to come on to that, but I'm going to hold at least a not yet answer, but I'm going to hold on to that one. Can we move, because I know we have limited time to do this, don't we? So can we move on to the next Menti question? Can somebody move us on to that? Right, and while people, so nope, we've gone way too far here, I think. I think the next Menti question is supposed to be about what features.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one more, that's the one. So far you've seen what the portal has and does so far, at least you've had a brief look. But if you have some ideas for perhaps additional data sources that might supplement the already excellent range that Yeti is using, or any new features that would encourage you to use this portal more or differently, or even to use it if you are not at the moment, this is a good moment to stick them in. And while you're having a think and putting things into Menti, because this is a slightly trickier question than the last one, there was a question in the chat about whether historical data is taken into account. So how far back do the projects go that are in the portal at the moment, Alap? And we'll need you to unmute your microphone.
Sorry. Yeah. So I think when Louise was doing the demo, pointed out that there was an activity listed for year 1900, but I think that's just a data error. But we do have activities listed right from 1992, which are mostly completed, and we have the latest ones happening in 2022. Our activity, it's especially the SEBI-Livestock project, it started in 2020, but it's also there. So there are activities ranging from 1992 to 2022. I think last 4 or 5 years within the livestock sector, you see an improvement in data quality, how it's been reported on the IDS repository. So there is an improvement within the last 5 years. So level of detailing's improved within, I would say, within the last 5 years.
Okay, thank you. So Sega, so there's some information going back to 1992, and it gets increasingly detailed as we get close to the present day. Is that far enough back for you? And this is from Sega. Yep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for that. I asked this question because, you know, for example, in West Africa, many research institutions are working many times since many decennies with researchers from Europe or USA as well. And all this data can be available through the research institution. And I think that for livestock sector, based on the fact that we always talking about availability of data, the scarcity of data, it's very important for us to see how we can learn from this kind of information from the developing part of this club, considering the many issues that we are faced. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's a good point, because otherwise we may end up doing the same things all over again. So 20 years back is probably a nice span. We've got some ideas for new features and data sources. We've got a couple of things going into Menti already. I'm not surprised that this part is going more slowly. So the first suggestion is a full list of all the donors on page 1, with a list of plus a list of known donors not reporting. So come on, guys, we're calling you out. Is this a technically feasible thing to do, Louise or Alap?
I'm just looking at the full list of donors. The donors, yes, because what we're interested in, some donors actually have their own repositories of information. And so what we were interested in doing is linking some of the projects out so that you could get a bit more granularity, us not collecting data, but just making available or highlighting what's available. plus a list of known donors not reporting, that would probably be something that we could speak to. It would be something that Yeti would know. If you look at their website, there's a lot of people feeding into that. So, I mean, we could definitely have a look, but I'm guessing most of them are. I think it's more the private sector we suspect is where the gaps are, but I don't know, Sarah, if you've got any, if you're aware of some big gaps that you know of in your work, or perhaps you'd need a bit more time to look into it.
Yeah, this is always a very good question as to like what is the coverage, right? Like, and who's there and who's not. I think, of course, like most big, like multilateral, bilateral organizations are publishing to Iatti. You know, we have some foundations, some in the private sector, a lot of INGOs, you know, and then a lot of local organizations as well, like publishing as implementing organizations. It very much depends on the region. You know, the coverage, you know, like, for example, you know, and it depends on what you're looking at, right? Like what your area of interest is, whether everyone is there. Of course, we know some key ones that perhaps are not there, or sometimes an organization might not appear to be there because they haven't updated their data, right? So like, these are organizations we of course reach out to try and encourage them to publish if they're big organizations, but it kind of, you need to look geographically or sort of like in a particular area to like more easily identify if there's key players in your particular area that, you know, are not publishing to Iatti. But so I can't say like percentage wise overall, like as to like, you know, like what the coverage is, but I would say most of the big players are publishing, you know, but it could be that the information is not updated potentially if you're not seeing it. But that's not a very straightforward answer to the question, but hopefully gives you a little insight there.
Okay, thank you. And there's an interesting discussion, I think, in terms of getting completeness. What's there, what's not, what can you find, what can't you? There's a little interesting discussion developing in the chat too around the sort of projects that might be tagged as One Health or public health, that actually have a livestock element to them, but aren't necessarily being tagged as livestock. And that's interesting. And Gareth has asked Alap whether AI could be employed to go through the database to find things that we know may potentially have livestock in them, and then perhaps go and have a look at some of the more promising ones and put them in. So that could be a little extra work, but it would be an interesting one to do.
I think definitely, because we've sort of targeted looking at agriculture, but then that might be moving into the One Health. When we spoke to one of the donors, they did actually specifically ask about zoonoses. So yeah, I mean, particularly if people provide us feedback on what they're interested in, we could start sort of targeting those areas. I see there's also a question about subcategories for animal welfare and food security. So the codes that we have at the moment, food safety, sorry. The codes that we have at the moment are sort of very much at that livestock level, but again, we have descriptions. So we have that free text search, but it may be something that we might do a bit of extra categorization on. Yeah.
And perhaps it might be something that that SEBI could come back to some people on this list here to say which subcategories would be useful to you, which ones would you like to be able to search on as well, because otherwise you can end up with an endlessly long list, most of which isn't actually used. There is a question which you very briefly mentioned it earlier, Louise, but perhaps we could come back to it, and that's the question of how much private sector investment links into Iatti's database and therefore feeds through to the portal. Does anyone want to tackle this one? Where should we start with this one? Would it be better to ask you, Sarah, first of all, whether anyone from the private sector is feeding into Iatti?
Yeah, I mean, there are definitely some private sector organizations that publish to Iatti, largely ones that are implementing organizations. And so, but, you know, I think that's definitely an area where there could be expanded coverage. But there are some private sector organizations that do publish to Iatti. And you can categorize those. So like if you look at the organization type, you can organize the organizations and filter based on which private sector organizations are there to kind of get a sense of who is publishing data on activities in your particular area, and then get a sense of like who may or may not be there.
And do you have any sense of the ones who are choosing to publish there? Do you have any sense of what draws them to you? What's the benefit to them of doing that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think like the motivations to publish to Yeti can vary. So, of course, like we would hope that the primary motivation would be a commitment to transparency and to share this information for, these uses. I think that sometimes organizations can publish as well, just I mean, maybe not so much for private sector organizations, but implementing organizations can publish as a requirement of a donor. So like some smaller organizations publish to Iott because they're required to publish to Iott, as part of the recipient of grant money or something like that. Yeah, I mean, the to your question, I mean, the motivation for private sector organizations may be not as clear cut as those the motivations for multilaterals, bilaterals, NGOs, things like that. So, but the motivations can vary. Okay,
and then I think the point you made there, and something that was put in the chat by Shannon, was if it's a private sector organization that's working with a funder, then there can be a rather larger incentive to publish, or even a requirement, and perhaps those are the people to start with. Right, okay, we've got two more things coming in, which I think we should try and address before we move on to our next question. The first thing is, how easy would it be to overlay other country information as map layers, like GDP or Ag GDP, or livestock populations, or the Gini coefficient, or any of these other millions of things that we use to categorize countries, group countries into regions?
Yeah, that's a very good suggestion. It's one of the features we were thinking of for version 2. It could be easy. It could be done where you integrate different data sources. So let's say from data sources for GDP or from World Bank to the project portal, and it could be either Viz in a Viz, or you could when on the country view, especially on the country view, if you want to view it across on the map, it could be easily laid out. So yeah, that's one of the version 2 requirements we have stipulated.
Great. Okay, so that one's already in the pipeline. And then there's the point about livestock investment alongside total investment in the country. And this is something that I think has SEBI tearing its hair at the moment already, because some of that can be estimated, but some of it's hard to find. There's a point here about linking to livestock master plans or ag investment plans for countries or regions for easy reference. If the person who made that point is willing to speak to it, it would be interesting to know what specifically drove you to make that suggestion.
So that was something that I put on there, Annie. And I think, again, if we're using this as sort of a starting point for funders looking to try and figure out at a geographical level who's investing, or at a commodity level who's investing, having easy reference to how that feeds into the country's vision. So through their ag investment plan or their livestock investment plan or livestock master plan, I think could be a way to reinforce those as a driving force for coordination.
So you're talking about something like a web link to wherever that plan is published. Would that be what would be in your mind?
Yeah, I think so, just so that it's sort of, you don't have to click away from the dashboard to then go Googling Ethiopia's livestock master plan or something.
Something else, okay. Now, I suspect that that's something that might be technically fairly easy to put into the dashboard, but at least initially the coverage would be very patchy because of our experience of trying to go and look for these things. Right, and then there's something I can't quite see, which is specific labeling for projects with GHG emission monitoring and reporting capacities. How easy is it to pull that out? I can understand why people might want to know this. How easy is it likely to be to pull this out of the information that's in Yeti?
So with GHG, so if on the project portal there is a search box where you search for greenhouse gas emissions. If the activity description's got GHG, labeled, it will be passed on the search criteria. So you would be able to list those activities. But if there is no mention right now, if there is no mention of GHG in either title description or activity narrative, it won't. But
Right.
if
Okay. Thank you. And then I think we'll move on to the next question now. But there's also a very helpful an offer of help from the Yeti tech team to related to the data search tool, which is now in the chat. Great. Okay, so let's move us on to our next question. And this is the very interesting one. And I think some answers to this have started to emerge in the very first question about how you would use this. But we all know that data and information are extremely important in driving what we do, but they're not the whole story. And we also know, I think, that all donors have their own funding cycles and planning cycles, which have their own particular momentum. So this is a chance to hear what you can tell us about how would something like this portal that makes it very easy for you to dive in and find out about livestock funding, how would that actually affect the coordination that goes on? How would that work? Would we all suddenly be completely joined up in how the livestock sector is funded, or would it not be quite that perfect? So just a few minutes to think about that and see if any brave souls would like to venture into this question. I know there was something on the very first page about, well, if I knew who was funding what, I could at least call them and, you know, have a chat with the people on the ground. So actually on the ground, there did seem to be something. That's a good point. It's currently all historic. It needs to be future looking to drive coordination. And that, I think, perhaps might be where the point about pipeline projects came in. Yep. So just knowing what people are doing might avoid you duplicating something that somebody already has on the go. Yep. Sharing knowledge and lessons learned. And I'm going to hold on to that thought because it will feed into the next question too. Okay, so seeing gaps or areas of lesser investment. If you're trying to do something that everybody else isn't doing, if you're working in a particular space. Oh, that's interesting. Sure, sharing resources. Right, so avoiding. I think there's a lot in there about not redoing something that somebody's already just done, which is a very important and rather obvious benefit from this. So I'm curious to know how this would feed into innovation. Is that by looking at the landscape and thinking, oik, there's an opportunity here that nobody's tried? Would that be how innovation would play out? If anyone would like to speak to the point on innovation, it would be really interesting to hear what was behind that. But then also the point that not every project can be innovative. Sometimes it's a question of picking up something that's there and making the next tiny step. Okay, combining interventions for optimal impact, helping to align efforts. Ooh, and I've just lost.
Sorry, something happened. I'm just going to pull it back up. One moment.
That's right. It's usually me that does that kind of thing. just for future reference, if you ever want anyone to test an IT innovation, give it to me, because I will definitely crash it for you. Okay. Vanessa, would you mind pulling us back up to some of the stuff that was on the top of the screen, because there are one or two things that I am definitely going to pull forward into our next discussion, I think. Right. Okay, there was a point though, which I think is definitely worth discussing here, and that's the one about how to an extent, Iatti is always going to be, it's going to be historic and present. It's not going to be, it cannot be completely future looking, because it can only, you know, at best be pipeline. How future looking does data need of this kind need to be to truly drive coordination? At what point do you need to catch people in an investment cycle to truly drive coordination? Would anyone like to speculate on this?
I think the point you made earlier that sort of all investors or funders have different pipeline planning and sort of investment cycle processes. So I don't think there's one answer, but I think for the most part, substantial projects take a year or two to really go from concept to implementation. So I think, at least from the foundation's perspective, having sort of a year or two of pipeline or sort of notional investment plans could really be helpful for coordination.
Yes, no, I definitely get that. How realistic is it that we would, and this is not back to you, Shannon, this is back to our Yeti team and Alap and Louise. How realistic is it that we would have very forward-looking stuff ever in a portal like this? And to what extent would that need have to be dealt with in some other way?
So I'll just add, Annie, there on the current version, we do have planned activities. So if a publisher is listed, even if it's not been under implementation stage, even if it's planned 2 years later, it might be listed. There will be a few examples where it's starting in 2025, but still it's listed. So for, let's say for Ethiopia, there's an activity that's listed, which is going to start around 2024. And then it's post-completion dates 2030. So there would be some kind of activity that's available, but it's still, you're relying completely on publisher to have that kind of information available.
Yes. So what you probably have is a sense of who to go and talk to that is likely to be investing in the future, but not a particularly complete picture of what they are likely to be investing in. That would be my feeling. Okay. I think we've got a few minutes left. So shall we move on to the next, onto the final question for this? And thank you very much for all the very interesting points that have already been put in. And this is coming back to LD4D as a network and also as a community that works together. I think we've had a look at some of the things that a portal like this can do to help donor coordination. We've thought about a few things that could be added to it, that that feasibly could be added to it that would enhance that. We've also acknowledged that it can't do everything. Because there's always a need, for example, for future, knowledge of the future, which you can't put into a portal like this. Is there anything else that the LD4D community could do collectively to support donor coordination, assuming we had some data and then needed to start a conversation? Is there anything else that could be done collectively? Or is this something that donors have to do by getting together themselves? Right, and Shannon's also made the point that pipeline information is quite sensitive, so you're not likely to see, you're never going to get 100% of that on a portal. Mhm. That's interesting. An integrated funding calls page so that people know where to go and look.
That in itself could be interesting if we actually looked at the donors pages, but we'd want to do it in sort of an automated way so it didn't become, but then you would get an idea of what the sort of open calls are. So it wouldn't exactly be the pipeline, it wouldn't be as what's being funded, but you'd get an idea of perhaps what's of interest. So that is possibly something for later down the line we could look at for the donors that we have already. I've just seen Sarah's put something in the chat as well, that there is some
Yes.
forward-looking side. So maybe it comes down to the publisher as well.
Yep. So once the budget's been agreed, once the funding's been agreed, but the project hasn't been started at that point, perhaps there could be more coming in. Right. Okay. So an integrated funding calls page, that's something that might have a practical application that could reasonably be done. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody. And if anyone does think of anything for any of these questions that if you suddenly go away and think, oh, I'd written that down, then then please just get in touch with Louise and Alap and say, I also thought of this. I think it's about time in the session, isn't it, for me to hand back to somebody else? Am I handing back to you, Louise?
Briefly, yes, and then sort of jointly Vanessa and myself. So as Annie mentioned, please feel free to get in touch with us. We've also got, there's a brain date session on the Alap, it's the 30th, is it, of September at 6 p.m.
Yeah,
so that's a group one. And I think you've already got quite a few people signed up, and that's going to be very interactive. And then you've also got some individual ones, have you?
Yeah, there is one-on-one where we can go through the data extraction process or the visualization or how it's been created, how the dashboard's been created, the design process itself. So that's one-on-one. It's it's half an hour session. So yeah, you can have a brain date booked. The one at 6 o'clock UK time, it's on 30th, where we'll go through the dashboard. There are a few spaces available, 5 spaces still available for that.
Yeah, so I mean, thanks very much for all your feedback. I think the next steps for us is to really look at those sort of mentee responses and start thinking about sort of prioritization of some of the things that we probably could move forward on. And there'll be probably some new releases, and we'll probably disseminate that. We'll speak to Vanessa. But yeah, just thank you very much for your time today. And Vanessa, is there any final things we need to say, or?
No, I think this has been really great. I think we had a lot of excellent ideas, and so lots of interesting possible follow-ups. I just wanted to mention that there is another session today for LD4D, which is on pastoralist data. That starts in a little while. You'll be getting an automated message on that. Sorry, I don't have my slides are all messed up, but yeah, do check the schedule for LD4D in case there's anything else you're interested in, and thanks for coming.